I want to show you an extension of the example that I showed just a couple of days ago. If you haven't seen that one, I'd say pause here, go back and watch that one. It's pretty quick. This one is sort of an extension. That one dealt with how to introduce Apigee as a proxy between an MCP client and a bare MCP server, where Apigee would enforce OAuth authentication between the MCP client and the MCP server. I showed a couple of different clients and a bare MCP server implemented with fast MCP. That basic check the token or check the OAuth token enforcement inside Apigee is good as far as it goes, but it's very basic. What it does is it checks the client credential, and Apigee can verify that the client is allowed to implement or invoke or use the API product that Apigee is exposing. That API product can be anything. In the case that I showed a couple of days ago, that API product was just an MCP server and the tools within it. It could just as well be a set of REST APIs, or it could be GraphQL or a gRPC service. But the point is, it's a digital surface or a digital product that's packaged and enabled by that client credential, whether it's an API key or a token. That's what Apigee does. What if you want to introduce some additional context into the authorization decision that Apigee enforces? Maybe something like the user identity, maybe some roles or groups that the user is associated to. Maybe authorization ought to depend on the data in the payload, what the user is sending, or some other environmental context. Apigee can't really do that all by itself, but OPA, this Open Policy Agent, is a general purpose policy management engine that Apigee can call into. And you can include as much context as you like into the authorization decision that is enforced by OPA. So think of OPA as a separate system, an external system that can render a policy decision, and Apigee can call out to that OPA and then enforce the decision that is made by OPA. OPA is open source, part of the CNCF, available as container image, really easy to deploy. In my case, I'm deploying it to Cloud Run, and this is my Docker file. Doesn't get simpler than that. You just call gcloud deploy with that Docker file, and then you have an OPA image. Now you do have to configure it, and then OPA will render the authorization decisions that you've configured. The configuration is maybe one of the obstacles to using OPA, because it depends on what is called REGO, which is an OPA-specific language, which looks like this. Not always approachable for some people. It's a little bit novel, super powerful, but different, and you kind of have to get used to it. So not for everybody, but powerful. So maybe worth a look if you're open to it. What I did was I wanted to kind of demonstrate how OPA works. So I used one of my favorite tools, Gemini CLI, and I gave it some instructions to build me a React front end for OPA. OPA's got a REST API. It's documented. So I told Gemini to generate an app that can help me show off, how OPA works. And this is what it produced. I have this running in my on my local host, and I'm going to kind of give you a tour. I've also contrived some configuration for OPA, and I'll show you what this looks like. So the main idea is there are going to be roles in my OPA rule set, and then I'll attach permissions to different roles. So I have role 1, role 2, super user, and then there's a last role, unwanted. And then I've added in some permissions on different methods, and all in these cases, this is all MCP methods. So these might be familiar if you're familiar with MCP, initialized and initialize, tools list, tools call. This one is allowed to call just one tool. This role is allowed to call a different tool. Super user is allowed to call both of those tools, and the unwanted role can list the tools but not call them, according to the permissions that I've set up this time. So how do you get into those roles? Well, I have a couple different mappings. One is if you sign in with a domain, I can give you a specific role. So Gmail, anybody that signs in with Gmail is going to get super user. Anybody that signs in with Hotmail is going to get an unwanted role. But I also have kind of an overlay. If you, for particular users, these people will get a specific role. So if you sign in with that email or this one, you get role 1. Even if I sign in with my Hotmail account, I'll get both of these roles and so on. Anyway, that's just the rule set that I've provided. And now I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So if I pass in, this is going to simulate, actually not simulate, but invoke OPA with input for its authorization decision. I'm just kind of using this form to create the input. And this is what it looks like. This is what the input looks like. It's sending in, okay, here's the user email address. Here's the MCP method. Here's the MCP tool. What's the answer? And when the answer comes back empty, the result is empty. This is an actual decision by OPA saying we evaluated, we have a decision ID, and this can be logged if you want. And the decision is there's nothing there. So that means it's denied. Whereas if I'm a different user, let's say I'm logged in with my Gmail account, I can send it to OPA, and it'll say, oh, you're super user based on the domain that you sent in. So that user will be allowed. We're going to allow that. So the result is non-empty, which means this user should be permitted to call this tool. And then I can try other email addresses as well. So that's kind of how OPA works. It renders the policy decision. Now it doesn't enforce it. It's just a policy decision, and you need some other system to enforce it. That's where Apigee comes in. I can show you maybe updating. If I lock this down, then the resulting rules, permissions for different roles are all empty. So at this point, I've reconfigured OPA, I've given it new rules, and if I try the same evaluation, it'll tell me, okay, that user is no longer permitted to invoke this tool. So OPA can be dynamic too. The rule set does not have to be static. You can update it. You can update the permissions and any of that other information. Okay, so this is just an OPA tour. Now what I want to show you is the API proxy that I produced in Apigee that calls out to OPA. This is just a standard API proxy. What I did was I took the API proxy that I showed in the prior example, and I added just this one additional flourish. In addition to verifying the JWT, which I showed you last time, I also added in a check OPA, just service call out to OPA, and determine if we're permitted. And then if the result is positive, then we'll allow that call to flow through. If it's not, then we'll forbid the call. So what does a service call out look like? It's really simple. It's just an HTTP call out. It's just sending that payload that you saw in that example form, basically the username, the MCP method, and the MCP tool. And we're asking, by sending this, we're saying to OPA, tell me what the authorization decision is, and then we'll actually enforce it. So this is my API proxy. And I'll just start a debug session. I have my MCP server, just as a reminder, looks like this. It's just written in fast MCP in Python. It's got a couple of different tools. I showed this last time. Watch the prior video to get a feeling for that. So that's my MCP server, and I'm going to use just Gemini CLI as the MCP client. And this is the endpoint for that API proxy that I was just showing you. And this is how you sign in. So let me go to my Gemini window. I think that's this one. And we'll just start up Gemini CLI. And it should tell me I'm not authorized, because I think at this point my token should have expired, my access token for that tool. So I'll do /MCP list, and I expect this to say, hey, you're not authenticated for this thing. So /MCP auth, and and authenticate for that MCP server that is configured. And now it's telling me, hey, you need to sign in. And it's actually popping up a browser login, to tell me to log in. This is the same motion that we saw in the prior video. So this should not be, this is not really that novel. So I log in with to auth 0 with my username and password, and then it's going to give me a consent, and that consent all flows through, and now I'm authenticated. So at this point, if I do, I'm back to my Gemini CLI. If I do MCP list, it's going to tell me, oh, you've got access to all these tools. In the background, you're seeing the Gemini CLI is communicating with the API proxy that's configured in Apigee, and is all those are being logged. So at this point, I'm going to ask, tell me about the air quality in Boulder, Colorado. And what I'm expecting is it's going to interact with Gemini. It's going to determine, oh, in order to answer this question, I want to use these MCP tools. So I'm just going to say, yes, always allow the tools from that server. It's going to translate that place name Boulder, Colorado to a latitude, longitude. And what we're seeing is, hey, it's unauthorized. Why is it unauthorized? Because we locked it down. It's being rejected by Apigee when it calls out. So this is the call for tools call. We should see MCP tools call here, and it's saying I want to call this MCP tool, and this is the input. So we verify the token. Apigee verifies the token, and that looks good. That's a valid token. The person is signed in. It's not expired. The next check we did, though, was call out to OPA, and we sent in this input. Apigee sent in this input. Here's the authenticated user. This is the MCP method they want to call, or this is the MCP, the JSON RPC method, and this is the MCP tool that we're calling. And the question is it or is it not permitted? And then we can extract the MCP result. And what we're seeing is just what we saw in that sample form. The result is empty. And so we're getting back that that fault. Apigee's configured to say, no, you can't do that. Sorry. If I modify this, now go back to provisioning, update the permissions and say, okay, let's just make them the default. And once again, super user has permission to call these things. And if I ran that evaluation again, just in the test form, we should see that's going to work. So if we can persuade Gemini CLI to ask that question again, tell me the air quality in or around Boulder, Colorado. So basically it's the same prompt. I just want to make sure that Gemini CLI tries again. Oh, it looks like it's not going to try. It's not going to try to do that. So I may have to quit this and restart Gemini so that it forgets that the context that it's been rejected, that it was forbidden by policy. So we'll start a new instance of Gemini MCP list. It should have cached tokens at this point. Tell me about the air quality in Boulder, Colorado. Gemini should lack the context from before that the tool was rejected, so this time it's actually going to work. And it resolves the place name and gets the air quality. And as you're seeing over here, now Apigee is calling into that OPA and is getting affirmative responses saying, yep, that's allowed now. The policy is permitting it for this user. So a nice kind of additional flourish, not really complicated to do in your Apigee API proxy, just a single call. That information can also be cached, so you don't need to make that call every time a transaction comes through. It is cacheable, so you can configure Apigee Proxy to be kind of a little more intelligent about calling out to that external policy engine. But in any case, a really simple way to add in OPA into your MCP transactions to provide really close control over exactly which MCP servers a user can invoke, or even which MCP tools a user can see or invoke. So that's OPA as embedded in Apigee. I hope this has been helpful. If you got any questions, drop them in the comments and let me know. Otherwise, till next time, keep it digital.